"You're gonna get your arm ripped off, Kia cowboy," the ranch owner shouted. "Let him go. He's a washout." In the scorching corral, Jack Calloway, 45, ignored him. His muscles were locked in a war against the fury of a Malinois. Titan wasn't just biting. He was screaming a high-pitched terror that only a combat vet would recognize. While the ranch hands laughed and filmed the veteran being attacked, seeing only a mad dog, Jack saw a soldier trapped in a flashback. He didn't pull back. Instead, he did something suicidal. He dropped the leash, fell to his knees in the red dirt, and closed his eyes. Where are you watching this story from? Let us know in the comments. If this journey of valor touched you, consider subscribing to Silent Veterans and help us give a voice to more incredible stories of our silent veterans. The dust in the corral tasted like copper and old blood. It coated the back of Jack Calloway's throat, a familiar grit that instantly transported him back to the outskirts of Kandahar. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was a high-end tactical ranch 50 miles outside of El Paso, and the sun was hammering down on the back of his neck like a blunt instrument. "He's going for the throat," a voice hollered from the perimeter. Jack didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. The Belgian Malinois at the end of the leather lead was a blur of teeth and kinetic energy, snapping at the air, at the dust, at the ghosts only the dog could see. The animal was named Titan, a failed military asset that the government had sold off as too aggressive for service. The ranch owner, a heavy-set man named Miller who wore a clean cowboy hat that had never seen a day of real work, was watching from the safety of the heavy wooden fence. "I'm telling you, Calloway," Miller shouted, his voice dripping with condescension. "That dog is broken. You're wasting your time and my money. Put a bullet in him and be done with it." Jack gritted his teeth, the muscles in his forearms burning as he checked the dog with a sharp tug. Not to hurt, but to disrupt. Titan spun around, eyes wide and rolling, foam flecking his black muzzle. The dog wasn't aggressive. Jack knew that look. The dog was in panic mode, fight or flight, and since he was tied to a 6-foot lead, fight was the only option left. "He isn't broken," Jack grunted, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the growls. "He's confused." "He's a liability," Miller spat, looking at the 3 younger ranch hands standing beside him. They were kids, barely 20, wearing designer boots and expensive sunglasses. They looked at Jack, a 45-year-old man with gray streaking his beard and a limp in his left leg, like he was a relic. To them, 45 was ancient. To them, war was a video game. "Hey, old-timer," one of the kids called out, smirking. "Need us to call the nurse? You look like you're gonna have a heart attack." The insult landed, but Jack let it slide. He was used to it. In the special operations community, you were an operator until you were 40, and then you were a ghost. He had retired 3 years ago after an IED in Syria scrambled his insides and killed his last dog. But the war hadn't retired from him. Jack's left knee buckled slightly as Titan lunged again, dragging him 2 feet through the loose dirt. The pain shot up his leg, sharp and hot. He was tired. God, he was tired. The heat, the noise, the disrespect. It was all piling up, a heavy weight on his chest. He needed a reset. With one hand still gripping the leather lead like a lifeline, Jack reached into the cargo pocket of his stained work pants. His fingers brushed against something rough and charred. It was a fragment of a scorched nylon collar, still smelling faintly of accelerant and burnt hair. The totem. The moment his thumb rubbed the jagged edge of the nylon, the sounds of the Texas ranch faded. The jeers of the young cowboys turned into the static of a radio. The smell of cow manure was replaced by the stench of burning tires and open sewage. For a split second, he wasn't a 45-year-old washout in a dusty corral. He was Sergeant Calloway, standing in the fatal funnel of a doorway in Ramadi, and he knew exactly what he had to do. He looked at Titan. The dog paused, sensing the shift in the man holding the leash. "You think they know anything about us, boy?" Jack whispered to the dog, his voice dropping to that specific, calm register he hadn't used in years. "They don't know a damn thing." Jack stopped pulling. He stopped fighting. He stood dead still in the center of the chaos, waiting for the beast to make the next move. Escritor de historias, emocionantes, Custom Gem. Here is Chapter 2. I have designed this section to be deeply immersive, focusing on the sensory overload of combat and the origin of the silent command. Chapter 2. The Jungle in the Dust. The smell hit him first. It wasn't the cow manure of the Texas feedlot anymore. It was the acrid, chemical stench of burning tires, raw sewage, and cordite. The dry heat of El Paso vanished, replaced by the suffocating, humid weight of a city on fire. Jack closed his eyes in the corral, but he wasn't there. He was 4,000 miles away and 20 years in the past. Fallujah, November 2004. The world was gray and brown. The sky was choked with smoke from the airstrikes that had pounded the city for 3 days straight. On the ground, the mud was slick with oil and blood. Staff Sergeant Jack Calloway, then just 25 years old and possessing 2 good knees, pressed his back against the crumbling plaster of a courtyard wall. His lungs burned. Every breath tasted like pulverized concrete. At his feet, panting rhythmically but making no sound, was Gunner. Gunner wasn't a Malinois like Titan. He was a sable German shepherd, 85 pounds of disciplined violence. He was the only thing in the city Jack trusted completely. "Stack up," the lieutenant whispered over the comms, his voice tight with the kind of fear that sharpens the senses. "We have movement in the target building. 2 squirts seen running in the back." Jack looked down at Gunner. The dog's ears were swiveled forward, twitching like radar dishes. Gunner knew before the squad did. He could hear the heartbeats inside the building. He could smell the adrenaline of the insurgents waiting in the dark. This was the fatal funnel, a 3-story concrete house in the Jolan district. The Marines called it the Hell House. Intel said it was a bomb-making factory. Gunner said it was a tomb. "Check your spacing," Jack murmured to the Marine behind him, a kid from Ohio named Miller. No relation to the ranch owner, but just as arrogant. Miller was a heavy gunner, carrying a saw, squad automatic weapon, and he was breathing too loud. In this kind of war, noise was a beacon. Noise got you killed. Jack tapped Gunner's shoulder. It was a subtle signal. "On me." They breached the door. The explosion of the breaching charge sucked the air out of the alleyway, followed instantly by the screams of, "Go! Go! Go!" The squad flooded the room, boots crunching on broken glass. It was chaos. Dust hung in the air like a thick fog, blinding the night vision goggles. Jack moved through the haze, his weapon raised, his left hand hovering near Gunner's collar. The first floor was clear, just trash and propaganda flyers scattered on the floor. But Gunner wasn't relaxed. The hackles on the shepherd's back were standing up like a razor wire fence. He was emitting a low, vibrating growl that Jack could feel through the leash more than he could hear. Something is upstairs. A clear left. Clear right. The Marines were shouting, communicating, filling the void with noise to keep the fear at bay. It was standard protocol, violence of action, speed and aggression. But Jack felt the mistake before it happened. They moved to the stairwell. It was a narrow, concrete throat leading into the darkness of the second floor. "Send the dog," the lieutenant ordered. Jack hesitated. The dynamic felt wrong. The air pressure in the house felt heavy. Gunner was refusing to move forward, a sign Jack had learned to respect. If a dog doesn't want to go, there is a reason. "Sergeant Calloway, send the damn dog," the LT barked, his voice echoing off the hard walls. The shouting. It was always the shouting. Jack tightened his grip on the lead. "He's signaling an IED, sir. We need to hold. We're taking fire from the roof. Move up." The noise discipline shattered. The Marines behind Jack started pushing, their boots clamoring on the stairs. The insurgents upstairs heard the argument. They heard the boots. They knew exactly where the Americans were. Click. It was the sound of a tripwire snapping, but it sounded like a thunderclap in Jack's ears. "Gunner, down!" Jack screamed, breaking his own rule of silence. But words were too slow. Sound travels at 343 meters per second. Shrapnel travels at 8,000. The explosion ripped through the stairwell. It wasn't a frag grenade. It was a daisy chain of 150mm artillery shells buried in the walls. The concussion wave hit Jack like a freight train, lifting him off his feet and throwing him backward into the courtyard. The world went white. Then, It went silent. Jack woke up to the taste of copper. His ears were ringing, a high-pitched scream that drowned out the world. He couldn't feel his legs. He tried to sit up, but his vest was caught on debris. The dust was settling. The stairwell was gone. In its place was a pile of rubble and rebar. "Gunner!" Jack croaked. The sound was weak, pathetic. He saw movement in the gray haze, a shape dragging itself through the dust. Gunner. The dog was covered in gray ash, looking like a ghost. He was limping, favoring his right shoulder, blood matting his fur, but he wasn't whining. He wasn't barking. He was crawling toward Jack, his eyes locked on his handler. Jack looked around. The squad was scattered. The lieutenant was down, unconscious. Miller, the heavy gunner, was screaming for a medic, his voice hysterical, giving away their position to every sniper in the district. "Shut up!" Jack tried to yell, but his throat was full of grit. From the roof of the adjacent building, the insurgents opened up. AK-47 fire chewed up the ground around them. The crack thump of the bullets hitting the masonry was terrifyingly close. They were pinned, wounded, exposed, and loud. Miller kept screaming, his panic acting as a homing beacon for the enemy fire. Gunner growled, trying to lunge at the source of the gunfire, trying to protect Jack. The dog was running on pure instinct, aggression. He wanted to fight the noise. Jack grabbed Gunner's vest, pulling him down behind a slab of concrete. "No," Jack whispered. The realization hit him with the force of a bullet. Aggression will get us killed. Noise will get us killed. We need to disappear. Jack looked at the panicked Marines. They couldn't hear him. He looked at Gunner. The dog was vibrating with the need to attack. Jack took a deep breath, forcing his heart rate down. He reached out with a trembling hand and placed 2 fingers gently behind Gunner's ear, right on the nerve cluster. He didn't pull. He didn't squeeze. He just pressed. A steady, unyielding pressure. He locked eyes with the dog. He projected a singular thought. Stillness. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Every instinct screamed to fight, to shoot back, to yell. But Jack forced himself to go limp. Gunner felt the change. The dog looked at Jack's face. He saw the unnatural calm in the middle of hell. The dog's ears flattened. The growl died in his throat. Gunner lowered his head, pressing his muzzle into the dirt, mimicking Jack. They became statues. The insurgents on the roof paused. The screaming Marine, Miller, finally passed out from shock. The courtyard went silent. The enemy waited. They fired a few blind shots in searching for movement. Thwack. A bullet hit the concrete 6 inches from Jack's head. He didn't flinch. He kept his fingers on Gunner's neck, transmitting the signal. "We are dead. We are dust. We are nothing." Gunner didn't move a muscle. A fly landed on the dog's bloody nose. He didn't blink. For 20 minutes, they lay there in the kill zone. The insurgents, convinced the Americans were all dead or fled, stopped firing and began to move down from the roof to loot the bodies. That was the mistake. They walked right past the slab of concrete. 3 of them. They were laughing, rifles slung over their shoulders. When the lead insurgent stepped within 5 feet, Jack didn't yell, "Get him!" He simply lifted his 2 fingers off Gunner's neck. The release of pressure was louder than a gunshot to the dog. It was the green light. Gunner exploded from the dust. He didn't bark. He didn't warn them. He hit the first man in the chest with the force of a missile, snapping his collarbone on impact. Jack raised his M4 carbine. Pop, pop. 2 controlled shots. The other 2 insurgents dropped before they could unsling their rifles. It was over in 3 seconds. Silence returned to the courtyard. Jack fell back against the rubble, gasping for air. Gunner stood over the downed insurgent, chest heaving, blood dripping from his muzzle. He looked back at Jack, waiting. That day, Jack learned the truth. The leash isn't for control. The voice isn't for command. The bond is psychic. And the most dangerous thing on the battlefield isn't the loudest. It's the one that can endure the silence. The memory faded, dissolving into the heat of the Texas sun. Jack blinked. the dust of El Paso stinging his eyes. The smell of cordite was gone, replaced by the smell of fear coming from the dog in front of him. Titan, the Malinois, was still panting, eyes wide, waiting for the abuse, waiting for the shock collar, waiting for the shouting. He was trapped in his own Fallujah. Jack looked at the dog. He looked at the screaming ranch owner. He's not broken, Jack whispered to himself, the ghost of Gunner standing beside him. He's just waiting for someone to stop shouting. Jack fell to his knees in the dirt. The ranch owner's jaw dropped. "What the hell are you doing, Calloway? Get up!" Jack ignored him. He looked Titan in the eyes. He didn't raise his voice. He raised his hand. 2 fingers. He was about to show these cowboys what a real weapon looks like. The sound of the rifle bolt racking forward was loud enough to snap the tension in the air like a dry twig. "Get away from the animal, Calloway," Miller shouted, leveling his hunting rifle at the dog's chest. "I'm not losing an $80,000 asset to a lawsuit because you want to play dog whisperer. I'm putting him down." Jack didn't look at the gun. He didn't look at Miller. He stayed on his knees in the red dirt, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on Titan. The Malinois was vibrating with adrenaline, his teeth bared, foam dripping from his black gums. The dog was waiting for the attack. He was waiting for the kick. He was waiting for the noise. But Jack gave him nothing. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Jack lowered his head. He exposed his throat. It was the ultimate gamble. In the wild, this was an offer of submission. In the tactical world, it was suicide. Jack extended his hand, palm up, fingers curled slightly inward. He didn't reach for the dog. He just let his hand hang in the space between them. He closed his eyes and exhaled, forcing his heart rate to drop. He visualized the slow, rhythmic thump of a helicopter rotor. Thump, thump, thump. He projected the silence of the grave. Titan froze. The growl that had been ripping from his throat sputtered and died. The dog's ears, which had been pinned back in aggression, flicked forward. He sniffed the air. He couldn't smell fear on the man. He couldn't smell anger. He smelled peace. The dog took a step forward. "Don't do it," one of the young ranch hands whispered, terrified. Titan lowered his head. He sniffed Jack's open palm. Then, he sniffed Jack's neck. The beast let out a long, shuddering sigh, the sound of a pressure valve finally being released. Titan's back legs gave out. He didn't collapse. He sat. Then, he lay down. He rested his heavy head on Jack's knee, closing his eyes. Jack opened his eyes. He didn't smile. He just reached out and placed his hand on the thick muscle of the dog's neck, right behind the ear. He tapped twice. Tap, tap. Titan's tail gave a single, solid thump against the dirt. The silence that followed was absolute. Miller lowered the rifle, his mouth hanging open. The young hands were staring, phones forgotten in their hands. They had expected a bloodbath. They had just witnessed a miracle. "How?" Miller stammered, stepping away from the fence, his arrogance deflating. "How did you do that?" Jack slowly stood up. His knees cracked. He wiped the dust from his pants. Titan stood up with him, glued to his left leg like a shadow. There was no leash. There was no collar. But the dog moved in perfect unison with Jack's limp. "I didn't try to break him," Jack said, his voice raspy. "I just listened to him." Before Miller could answer, the low rumble of heavy engines cut through the dry Texas air. Heads turned toward the long gravel driveway. A cloud of red dust was billowing into the sky, heralded by the aggressive whine of turbocharged diesel engines. 2 black Chevrolet Suburbans with government plates tore around the bend, moving with a speed that suggested official business. They didn't slow down for the potholes. They roared up to the corral, tires crunching on the gravel, and skid to a halt in a V formation. "What is this?" Miller asked, panic creeping into his voice. "Did you call the cops, Calloway?" The doors of the lead vehicle flew open. 2 men in plain clothes but bearing the unmistakable posture of military security stepped out, hands resting near their waistbands. But it was the passenger from the second vehicle who froze the blood in Miller's veins. He was an older man, wearing the operational camouflage pattern, OCP, of the U.S. Army, but with the sleeves rolled up. On his chest, the stars of a lieutenant general shone in the afternoon sun. General Vance, commander of Joint Special Operations. Miller scrambled to straighten his expensive cowboy hat. General, we weren't expecting an inspection. I assure you, the facility is... General Vance walked right past Miller as if he were a fence post. He didn't even glance at the young ranch hands who were now standing at rigid, terrified attention. The general walked straight into the corral, his boots kicking up dust. He stopped 5 feet from the dirty, sweaty janitor and the dangerous dog. Titan let out a low warning growl. Jack twitched his pinky finger against his thigh. Silence. Titan fell silent instantly. The general stared at Jack. He looked at the gray beard, the limp, the stained work shirt. Then, slowly, the general raised his right hand and rendered a crisp, slow salute. It took us 6 months to find you, Master Sergeant, the general said, his voice thick with emotion. Miller choked. Sergeant. General. That's just Jack. He's the maintenance guy. He washes the kennels. The general slowly turned his head. The look he gave Miller could have peeled paint off a tank. This man, the general said, pointing a finger at Jack, wrote the manual that you are currently failing to teach. This is Master Sergeant Jack Calloway, first handler into Tora Bora, sole survivor of Operation Red Wing's K-9 unit. The man is a national asset, and you have him shoveling shit. Miller went pale. I didn't know. His file just said honorably discharged. That's because the rest of his file is blacked out with ink that costs more than your entire ranch, the general snapped. He turned back to Jack. Jack, we need you. The program is failing. The new dogs. They don't have the discipline, they don't have the spirit. Jack looked down at Titan. The dog was leaning against his leg, looking up with adoring, absolute loyalty. I'm done with war, General, Jack said quietly. My war ended in the sand. I'm not asking you to go to war, the general replied softly. I'm asking you to teach them how to come home. We have 100 dogs like Titan, broken, angry, scheduled for euthanasia. We need someone who speaks their language. Jack looked at the dog. He looked at the general. Then he looked at the open gate of the corral. I don't do it for the brass, Jack said, his hand resting on Titan's head. And I don't do it for the money. Name your terms, Jack. Jack pointed at Titan. I take him. He's not government property anymore. He's mine. The general smiled. Done. He was written off as destroyed 10 minutes ago anyway. Jack nodded. He tapped his thigh. Titan snapped to a perfect heel. As they walked toward the black SUVs, passing the stunned ranch owner and the silent boys, Jack stopped. He turned to Miller one last time. You can buy the dog, Miller, Jack said, his voice carrying across the silent ranch. But you can't buy the respect. You have to bleed for that. The ride back to the airfield was quiet. The interior of the government SUV smelled of leather and conditioned air, a stark contrast to the dust and manure of Miller's ranch. General Vance sat in the front passenger seat, reviewing a digital file on a tablet. In the back, Jack Calloway sat with Titan. The dog hadn't moved since they left the corral. He lay across the back seat, his heavy head resting squarely on Jack's thigh, his eyes closed. Occasionally, the dog's paws would twitch, chasing phantom insurgents in a dream. But Jack would simply rest his heavy, scarred hand on the animal's shoulder, and the twitching would stop. That we have a facility in Montana, General Vance said, breaking the silence without turning around. 300 acres, pine trees, cold air, no gunfire, no shouting. It's a rehabilitation center for special operations assets that can't reintegrate. Jack looked out the tinted window as the Texas scrubland blurred by. A retirement home for broken toys. A sanctuary, Vance corrected. For the dogs, and for the men who need them. Jack looked down at Titan. The dog was finally sleeping. Deep, restorative sleep. The kind Jack hadn't had in 3 years. Miller was right about one thing, Jack murmured. This dog is dangerous. He is, Vance agreed. He's a weapon. You don't throw a weapon in the trash just because the safety is stuck. You fix the safety. They arrived at the private airfield as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. A C-130 Hercules waited on the tarmac, its rear ramp lowered like a welcoming mouth. As Jack stepped out of the SUV, Titan hopped down beside him. The dog didn't bolt. He didn't sniff around. He stood at a perfect heel, scanning the perimeter, ready to work. Jack walked toward the plane. He didn't look back at Texas. He didn't look back at the life of a janitor, or the disrespect, or the loneliness. He had a pack again. 6 months later, the air in the Montana mountains was crisp and smelled of pine needles and snow. Jack stood on the edge of a large, grassy field. He wasn't wearing a janitor's uniform anymore. He wore a clean tactical jacket and durable cargo pants. He looked healthier. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, and while the limp was still there, his stride was stronger. In front of him stood 12 men. They were young, Rangers, SEALs, MARSOC Raiders. All of them had that hollow, 1,000-yard stare that comes from seeing too much evil and sleeping too little. At the side of each man sat a dog. Some were Malinois, some shepherds, one a massive Dutch shepherd. All of them had been labeled uncontrollable. All of them had been scheduled to be put down. Most people think control is about volume, Jack said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the field with the weight of absolute authority. How they think if you scream loud enough, the demon goes away. But you men know better. You know that in the bush, noise is death. Jack looked down. Titan was sitting by his left boot, watching the new recruits with golden, intelligent eyes. This isn't about dominance, Jack continued, walking down the line of men. These dogs don't need a master. They had masters. Their masters died, or left, or broke. These dogs need a brother. Jack stopped in front of a young corporal whose hands were shaking. The dog beside him, a nervous female shepherd, was whining and pulling at the lead. She feels your fear, son, Jack said softly. You're telling her there's a threat. I can't stop shaking, Sergeant, the corporal whispered, shame coloring his cheeks. I know, Jack said. He reached out and gripped the kid's shoulder. So stop trying to fight it. Just breathe. Tell her you're here. Jack stepped back. He looked at the group. Drop the leashes, Jack ordered. The men hesitated. It went against every regulation in the book. Drop them, Jack repeated. One by one, the leashes hit the grass. 12 dogs were now loose. Now, Jack said, closing his own eyes. Silence. The men went still. They stopped fidgeting. They stopped checking their watches. They just stood there, in the shadow of the mountains, breathing the cold air. Jack raised his hand, 2 fingers. In unison, 12 dogs sat. There were no barks, no growls, just the sound of the wind through the pines. The silent command had passed to a new generation. Jack looked at Titan. The beast looked back, his tail giving a single happy thump against the ground. They weren't ghosts anymore. They were home. If you were moved by Jack and Titan's story of quiet courage, please like this video, share it with someone who respects our veterans, and subscribe to Silent Veterans for more stories of the unassuming heroes who walk among us.